Welcome to Anatomy and Physiology 2. You got through the first half of the textbook, but now we're going to finish off the rest of our systems. The first one that we'll start with this semester is the endocrine system. Now this PowerPoint is a medium-sized PowerPoint. There's a lot of information being covered. We also recommend reading the textbook, but the PowerPoint is going to have the concentrated information that we will actually test over. So though the textbook has great examples and a lot more information for us, I won't be testing over something if it's in the textbook, but not in the PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint is the core of what you're going to want to study for our exams. Here I've pulled up our PowerPoint for the endocrine system. Now, though you may not have been calling it the endocrine system, you've actually been blaming a lot of things in your life on the endocrine system. That is, if you've ever been a teenager and you had acne, you probably blamed that on some hormone changes. If you were moody, or you were sleepy, or you had a bad attitude, or you were getting tall and gangly, all of things you might have blamed on hormones. And hormones are produced by our endocrine system, so you just didn't know who to blame. Questions like, did you sleep well last night? Did you grow as tall as your siblings? Do you have a fast or a slow metabolism? What mood did you wake up in today? All of these have to do with your hormones and thus your endocrine system. Now, the word endocrine, where does that come from? It actually means affecting within. Now, way back in 1855, this was first identified as internal secretions. All we knew was that something that was secreted internally had to do with controlling our organs and communication in the body, but no one knew what it was exactly. It wasn't until 1905 that these secretions were identified as hormones, chemical substances that control and regulate the activity of certain cells or organs. And thus, we had our definition. The endocrine system is made up of glands that produce and secrete hormones. When it comes to our endocrine system glands, they're not as well known as other organs like the stomach or the brain. These glands are located all over your body. This chart shows us a couple of them: the pituitary gland in the brain, the thyroid gland in the throat, some adrenal glands on top of your kidneys, just to name a few. So what do our hormones do exactly? They're going to have very widespread functions throughout the body. Some of these hormones are being used to regulate your growth. They control how tall you end up, how fast you grow. Others regulate your metabolism. They can give you a slow metabolism or a fast one, allowing you to burn more calories. They regulate your body fluid balance, controlling where that fluid is in your body. They also regulate sexual development. These are the hormones that are responsible for when puberty happens. Does it happen at 9, 12, at 14? They also regulate your response to stress and injury, controlling how well the body responds and how quickly it recovers. Maybe it's just keeping the body in stress mode for hours and hours. For the most part, these hormones are all going to be used to also maintain homeostasis. Now, do you remember what homeostasis is? Might have been a couple of months. Just to review, homeostasis is that your body basically is going to have an ideal internal environment, the perfect settings for the optimal performance of your organs. The big one that we know of is temperature. Your body has a specific temperature the cells like to be at. When you have a fever, your body is raising that temperature. Now, this is kind of like your house. If you get too hot in your house, if that temperature starts creeping up towards 80 degrees, for example, you're going to turn the AC on. You're going to want that to cool everything off back to a comfortable temperature. Your body is the same way, but in other areas too. You have specific levels of calcium that your blood likes to be at. So if your calcium levels go too high, your body will use hormones to pull it back down and lower it back to the proper level. So it's like a thermostat. Now there's two ways that your body can maintain homeostasis. It can maintain it with the nervous system or the endocrine system. Now, the nervous system, we learned about that in A&P2. It's where we're going to use neurons that have long axons that travel to target cells and have action potentials that run down those axons. Now, one thing we learned about this is that it's very fast. If you think in your head that you want to wiggle your finger, it's happening as soon as you think about it, instantaneous. But after I think about it and I stop thinking, it stops. Go, stop. Go, stop. That's the nervous system. It's very fast, but once I issue that command and I stop it, the movement stops. Now, that's whenever you use your nerve cells. The endocrine system is very different because it's going to be slow to start, and then once the body stops, those hormones can still be working and circulating for hours. It's like if I thought I want to move my finger. It finally moved, and it's still moving. I wonder how long it'll take to stop. I only told it to do one movement. Oh, okay, now it stopped. That's kind of like the endocrine system. Slow to start, slow to stop. Now, this can be very useful whenever we want to have an effect that may last a long period of time, like putting out growth hormone. You're not done growing in one day, so having it spread out over a long period of time is helpful. So your body has two different ways to work it. Now, the endocrine system, rather than using an action potential being sent down a neuron, is going to transmit in a different way. It's going to send out hormones, chemical messengers, into the blood, which is going to circulate until it finally reaches its target cells and communicates with that cell and tells it what to do. Here's another slide of those glands. And this one is a little more accurate to the size of the body. Your major endocrine organs are your pituitary gland in the center of the brain. We see it right here. As well in the brain, we're going to have the pineal gland and the hypothalamus. Going down into the throat, we see the thyroid gland. This is a butterfly-shaped gland that you're not going to really notice or see unless there's some kind of imbalance. Now, on the back side of the thyroid, there are 4 very tiny glands called the parathyroids. Going down into the chest, we have what is called a thymus gland. We'll see this is mostly active in children. It's very large, and it shrinks into adults, so it's just a very tiny gland over the heart. Then we have the adrenal glands. These guys are sitting on top of the kidneys like little hats. Then there's the pancreas. This one does not count as a major endocrine organ because it has other functions, but it does have some endocrine function as well. Then we have the gonads, that is our reproductive organs, ovaries and testes. They have a hormonal function as well. Now with the glands, I kind of referenced that before, but there are some organs that all they do is produce hormones. So they are major endocrine organs. That's their function in the body. These include the pituitary, the thyroid, the parathyroids, the adrenals, and the pineal gland. So all they do is produce hormones. Neuroendocrine organs are a little bit different. The hypothalamus is an example. It is part nervous tissue and part endocrine tissue. So it can actually produce hormones, but also just send out signals via nerves. Lastly, we have organs that have other primary functions besides for producing hormones. These guys include the pancreas, the thymus, and the gonads. This is a model that we're going to get pretty familiar with in lab. It has a lot of these different glands on here. We're going to see the pituitary on the left, top left. Then there's the thyroid at the throat, the adrenal glands sitting on top of the kidneys. Then we have the testes, the pancreas, the parathyroid on the back side of the thyroid, and the ovaries. So just to test yourself, can you tell me which of these are going to be a primary endocrine organ? 4 of them are the pituitary, the thyroid, the adrenal, and the parathyroid. Those guys are all those major endocrine organs, whereas the testes, the ovaries, and the pancreas have other functions. These are some pictures showing us in human cadavers where these glands are located. Pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the adrenals in the abdomen, the thyroid in the throat, the parathyroid, that one just shows it on a diagram, and also the thymus gland. Now, our glands are going to be stimulated to release hormones by one of 3 methods, and these are kind of confusing when you first come across them. The first one is called hormonal stimulation. This is when a gland is triggered to release its hormone by a hormone. At least the name goes together. Humoral stimulation is a little bit different. This is when a gland is going to be monitoring nutrient levels in the blood, and if one rises or falls, it's triggered to release its hormone to balance it. Neural stimulation is the last one. This is when a gland is triggered to release its hormone by the nervous system. So a nerve has come down, connected to that gland, and signaled it by an action potential to release its hormone. Let's look at these one by one. First off, we have the hormonal stimulation. Now this example is going to be using the pituitary gland, which is in your brain, releasing hormone that travels down to the thyroid and your throat, which will release the hormone into the blood. So this example is on the thyroid specifically. The thyroid gland is going to be triggered to secrete a hormone by a hormonal signal from a controlling gland, in this case, the pituitary. All right, so here the pituitary gland has released a hormone called the thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. Now the TSH is going to be released into your bloodstream. It'll travel through your blood until it reaches the thyroid gland. When it reaches the thyroid gland, it's going to stimulate that gland to release its thyroid hormone into the blood vessels. Now that's going to travel through the body and regulate your metabolism. So here, the thyroid gland in the throat is not the one deciding when to release its hormone. Instead, that's controlled by the pituitary in your brain. So it's kind of like the in-between. But your thyroid is told when to release hormone by a hormone being released in the body. Next up is humoral stimulation. This is when a gland is going to be triggered to release a hormone, not by a controlling pituitary gland, but instead by changes in the blood. So the pancreas is going to be able to monitor the blood itself. Now, our example of that is going to be your blood glucose levels. Your pancreas is going to be monitoring the level of glucose you have in your blood. So we're on a normal day, you might be fine, but maybe you went to a birthday party and had 3, 4 slices of cake. Your blood glucose level went up. Now the pancreas was monitoring that, and it wasn't told by the pituitary gland. Instead, it monitored the blood, saw that changing nutrient levels of glucose, and it put out insulin, a hormone to counter that and to cause the body to increase the uptake of glucose, bring the level back down. So humoral stimulation is the gland monitoring those nutrient levels and releasing its hormone in response. If you recall, on the thyroid, it wasn't monitoring the blood and deciding when to release thyroid hormone. Instead, it was being controlled and told to release by a hormonal signal from the pituitary gland. Lastly, we have the neural stimulation. Now, this is when a gland is triggered to secrete a hormone by a signal from the nervous system. An example of this is going to be the body's fight or flight mode. If I am suddenly scared by something, that signal came into my eyes because visually I saw something startling, like a snake. So that stimulated my nervous system. And for that to be translated into a hormonal response of a release of adrenaline through my body, that is going to go and transmit the information from my spinal cord and my nerves out to my adrenal gland to tell the adrenal gland via that nerve to release adrenaline. That way I'm ready to respond and have that fight or flight mode ready to go. So here's an example of glands at work. We're going to see if we can figure out what type of stimulation is being used here. So here's an example where we have to identify what type of stimulation is occurring. Looking at this chart, we're going to first see that that yellow box in the middle says homeostasis, our blood calcium level. So what we're looking at is going to be the calcium in your body is going to be maintained at a specific level, ideal for building bones, for not having too much. And if that level were to rise, which is number 1 on our chart, your thyroid gland is going to release a hormone called calcitonin. Now, calcitonin has the effect of causing your bones to have an uptick in the amount of calcium they're taking in, and it lowers the blood calcium as we begin to store a lot of this. We excrete it from our kidneys. Now, maybe we produce too much calcitonin, and now our calcium levels are going down, and we're having to start to cause some problems. Now, we can have our parathyroids release a hormone called PTH, or the parathyroid hormone, and it's going to cause our blood calcium levels to rise back up again. We get that back to homeostasis. It's normal. So what type of stimulation is this? Hopefully you guessed that it was humoral. This is going to be a gland monitoring a nutrient level in the blood. It monitored that and saw that the calcium levels had risen too high or too low, and it responded with the release of a hormone to bring it back to homeostasis. Now, what glands were involved? In this case, it was the thyroid and the parathyroid. These guys actually produce hormones that work in opposition to each other. The calcitonin lowering the level and the parathyroid hormone raising the level. This is a really good example of how the body is going to be able to balance a nutrient level by either producing hormones to raise it or producing hormones to lower it. Now, not all hormones are the same type. Some of them, we want them to last for very short periods of time. Others, we want them to stay in the body, stay in the blood being circulated. So we're going to have different types being produced. First off, we have steroid hormones. These guys are lipid soluble, and they're synthesized from cholesterol. An example of that is testosterone. Then we have biogenic amine hormones. These guys are water soluble, meaning they can dissolve in water. They are a single modified amino acid, so they're not very big. An example is epinephrine. Lastly, we have proteins. These are also water soluble, but they're made up of chains of amino acids. They're larger in size. An example of this is insulin. And we'll see more on the coming slides. Here's some pictures showing us steroids on the left. Now, our steroids are being formed from cholesterol. Different ones would be your reproductive hormones, the estrogen, the testosterone. Then we have the biogenic amines that are a single amino acid. And lastly, we have proteins, which are chains of amino acids. Now, why does your body have both lipid and water-soluble hormones? The reason is that whenever a hormone goes into the bloodstream, If it's a lipid-soluble hormone, we're going to actually be able to bind it to a carrier protein, and it's going to circulate in your bloodstream for a long period of time. It might be able to circulate for 12 hours. Now, the unbound ones that are water-soluble, what they are going to do is they're going to quickly be filtered out of the blood by the kidneys, for example. The kidneys are able to filter out very tiny small particles, so these water-soluble hormones that dissolve into the water quickly can get filtered out by the body. They may only stay in there for a minute to an hour. Whereas the lipid-soluble ones, they're going to remain in the body much longer, circulating over and over through the bloodstream. So it depends on what the purpose of that hormone is. Now, when it comes to our hormones and how long they last, you've probably heard of some of these differences, but you've felt them too. Say you're driving down the road on your way to school, and suddenly someone pulls into the lane in front of you, and very quickly you have to jerk the wheel to the left, barely avoiding an accident. You honk at them a little bit as they drive off, and then you forget about it. But how are you feeling physically? Are you shaky, jittery? Do you feel your heart beating faster because you nearly got run over? And then it fades away. It doesn't stay very long. You just experienced a water-soluble hormone, a biogenic amine. It was epinephrine shooting through your system. Your body's quick response to something that was going to be dangerous to you and put you in the best situation to fight it and to survive. But after you succeed in that, your body relaxes, and all of those water-soluble hormones are very quickly removed from the bloodstream. So their effect is short-lived. Now, how these hormones communicate with our cells is going to differ based on if they are lipid-soluble or water-soluble. Do you remember what material our cell walls are made up of? Need to have the Jeopardy music playing right there. Do, 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 do. Lipids. I'm sure you got that right. So you're going to have a lipid layer forming your cell wall. And whenever a lipid-soluble hormone comes up, it's able to just travel right into the cell very easily because it's lipids and lipids. Everybody gets along. So those go directly into the cell and activate the genes. Now, when it comes to water-soluble hormones, they can't come in. The water-soluble hormone can't make it through that lipid cell wall. So instead, it's going to come and bind to a receptor protein located on that cell. This is going to activate a little tiny messenger inside of the cell that will trigger the response. So it's kind of like a relay race, basically. That information from your water-soluble hormone is going to be transmitted into the cell, but the hormone itself stays on the outside. So what kind of receptors are located on our cells? What are these? So receptors are going to be used by those water-soluble hormones because they can't enter the cell. Instead, they're binding to receptors on special target cells. Now, this is handy because if a hormone goes out into the body, it's not going to react with every single cell in the body. Instead, it will react with the ones that it is targeted for. So you can release a hormone that only affects adipose cells or only affects muscle cells. It's not going to affect a liver cell or a heart cell. Now, your cells can kind of choose how responsive they want to be. They can either increase or decrease, so up or down, regulate the number of receptors they have on their cell surface. A cell with less receptors is not going to get activated as quickly or as much as a cell with more receptors. So it can kind of choose how responsive it wants to be. Now, you can also have a situation where you could have a hormone for something and a hormone against something binding to the same cell. So that can happen as well. They can inhibit each other or amplify. This picture shows us an adipose cell with some target cell receptors on it, a liver cell, and a muscle cell. So each of these cell types are going to have different receptors on them. So a hormone may travel through the blood and be exposed to all of these cells, but might only bond to the adipose one. When a hormone is produced, we don't want it to just stay in the system forever. So we're going to have a method to eliminate those hormones from the bloodstream. This can be measured using what is called a hormone's half-life, the amount of time it takes to reduce the hormone concentration in the blood by half. The methods the body uses include a target cell binding to the hormone, using those receptors, and then breaking it down. So that way it's not just going to be floating free through the blood anymore. So once it does its job and communicates with that cell, we trap it and break it down. Another option is the liver cells can break it down instead. Lastly, the kidneys can filter them out of the blood and excrete them out of the body. That's what a lot of our water-soluble hormones don't last very long, is the kidney filters and excretes them out, sometimes very quickly. Whew, now that was a lot of information on how these glands and hormones worked. Now what the next slides are going to be doing is going to be taking us through the glands one by one, breaking them down, telling us what hormone each gland produces and what the function of that hormone is. Now I won't be including these in the PowerPoint because a lot of this information, it's really straightforward. So this is going to be up to you to study on your own. Now, a lot of this information is going to also be covered by the lab practical. We're going to see the model of these different glands. We might see them in an anatomical model as well. We're also going to see a couple of word questions. Might ask you, what hormone does the pituitary produce? And you just have to name one of the hormones that gland produces. You don't have to list every single one. We may also ask, what is a function of a hormone? So it's easy with what is the function of the growth hormone, but if I were to ask you what is the function of the TH hormone, you might have to think a little harder. So that we have to also know for the lab practical and for the lecture exam. Now going in, there's a certain chart. Here we go. This chart right here. This is part of the chart that we have for the lab practical. So what we have to know for that is limited to these charts for the different glands. Now at the very end of the PowerPoint, we do have a little review quiz that you can use to see how much that information you've retained and to give you an idea of what an exam question could look like over the endocrine system. All right, that's all for now. Good luck with your studying.